as Lakota, part of perhaps around 250 different tribes in the United States today, their culture or way of life is in a process of transitioning, changing. We did not necessarily feel that we needed to change our way of life, but it was maybe the point of it was made by some physical things which we call genocide or extermination, genocide by extermination. And that's what we have gone through in this history of perhaps 500 years. From the time that we came onto the reservations, we were forced, in some cases, to learn the English language, and we were discouraged, both verbally and physically, discouraged from using our native language. And so at this time today, we have a lot of our younger people that do not really understand the Lakota language. The way of life is beginning to disappear because if they can only think in English, then what they do as Lakota is done in an English thought. The values that are projected by the Lakota thought are different from the values that are projected in the English thought. There is no school on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation that has effectively produced a fluent speaker. And I took the responsibility to establish this private school. It's not easy to do that because of the lack of monies that are available on the reservation for the people that would be attending. So it continues to be a struggle to be able to raise the funds necessary to have a full 9 or 10 month school year to be able to use the language. The private school that we've got here has a tremendous amount of history in it, and the history comes from who we are as a people. I come from a group of people that in history are perhaps the last process of extermination by massacre. And my grandfather was one of them. He was 14 years of age at the time that the massacre occurred. And he was shot twice, but managed to escape. He actually escaped, and where we're at was part of his land that he took from the government in terms of a process that the government had called the Allotment Act. And so I've taken a piece of that land and I've designated that for the school. But it even goes beyond Wounded Knee. It goes beyond back to 1882, when his grandfather, or my great-great-grandfather, who was Chief Bigfoot, or Sitranka, had traveled to Washington, D.C., along with other Lakota leaders for discussion with the federal government. And at that time, he asked for a school. And his statement was that there are more and more people coming who speak a language different from ours, and their way of life is different from ours. And it appears that we're not going to be able to be rid of them. They're here to stay. We need to understand their language. We need to understand their thinking and their way of life so that we could live, and he said, peacefully and harmoniously. And the government officials said, yes, we will do that. That was 8 years before 1890 when the massacre occurred. We're here at
a very historic site. The historic site is the scene or the site of a great tragedy that happened in 1890. On December 29th, 1890, there were a party of Minihoju Lakotas that were in flight and were apprehended about 2 miles from here the day before. And on the morning of December 29th, the tragedy occurred after the military, the soldiers, had confiscated all of the weapons of people and then opened fire on them. This is a tragedy that has left a lasting mark and is aware by perhaps the entire world itself as known as the Wounded Knee Creek Massacre of 1890. Behind me is a grave site, a mass grave site, where nobody knows for certain how many people were buried there, but somewhere in a range of nearly 300 people, of which there were 90 men and approximately 200 women and children that were killed. I can only tell you the story that my grandfather told me, and that story is a story of his own personal experience. They opened up fire on him, and the firing was so great that it was nothing but a cloud of smoke. He had already gotten past the line where the soldiers were, and he stood up and he decided to run because there was nothing else to do. And as he ran, all of a sudden he felt like an axe had hit him in the back, knocked him on his feet and on his back, and they shot him through the calf leg muscle of his leg. He was able to find refuge in the ravine. The firing stopped, and then he heard an interpreter call out. And the interpreter said, "We will fire no more. Come back up and we will treat you." So he started to get up, and there were many people that were in the ravine. And as they started to get up, most of them had not been shot, and they were easily were able to crawl back up. He was one of the last to come up, and before he came up, they opened fire on him again. And there were people that were being slaughtered. There was a group of people locally that came off of the hill, which is to the west, and this is the direction of west. They came down firing weapons, and the soldiers that were on the fringes of the killing, they ran back to where the main group was. And one of them spotted my grandfather, and he came down into this ravine, and he hollered at him. He said, "Raise your arm, I will catch you." And he raised his arm, and the rider hooked his arm and lifted him back onto the back of the horse and immediately left. That is our history of what had happened here. This is a culmination of a great deception that happened to the people of the United States, indigenous people. Land was taken from them because land was to be used to make whatever wealth they could out of the resources, out of the land itself. And we ended up with but a small part. All totaled, we ended up with 2% of the land that we once occupied throughout the country. And now this is what we have here that's left for us, for our history and for our heritage.